we reached a milestone in our layout in Union this year, earlier this year, where we realized it's been 10 years since we started this layout. And this is kind of a trip back in memory lane for some of the people. And it's always kind of surprising. I guess the same thing happens to your home layouts or whatever, that you start looking at the things that were done and you kind of amaze yourself at how quickly things did change. So to put this presentation together, I had, John mentioned, take a lot of pictures. Well, I probably went through 3,000 or 4,000 photographs in the past week and a half to try to come up with this. And I'm going to try to go as quickly as we can to go through them. I didn't show all the photographs. I tried to pick a sampling, and there's a lot of stuff I couldn't even cover. Huh? 1,000, maybe 300 or something. But anyways, so this is what the museum kind of looks like today. There's all kinds of stuff there, and you can go and visit that after the meeting today as well. This is what it looked like 11 years ago, roughly. They had acquired this building, and they had to do a bunch of restoration in it. You can see the walls, a lot of rot and stuff like that you end up seeing. You'll notice it had a stairway to get in on the end. Now it has a handicap access ramp. So there's some bunch of things that were done along the way. You can see it looks pretty bad. I noticed there was a window on the edge. I never noticed that before. It's been covered over. So this is what the inside looked like. Okay, I'm moving around. This is what the inside looked like. You notice the floor. That's the original scale that was there in 1862. That building was built in 1875 originally. That's a yellow pine floor. They were hoping to save the floor at one point. They decided that was not a good idea, so they covered it all over and then just put nice floor tiles over it. So now we get a nice clean environment, which is important if you're designing a layout. Cleanliness of the floor relates to cleanliness of your layout. So this is Bill Gaver. This is actually in 2012. I find it interesting because a lot of times people say, well, how do these things start? Well, I'm guaranteed that Bill Gaver was pretty instrumental in getting this started. Here he is presenting the concept for what they wanted to do in this building. And you'll notice there's still no sheetrock on the walls. And he's got generic square rectangle things that where the layout should end up going. And behind him are some copies that were taken from the B&M Historical Society to show what the actual track plans look like at that time, or actually 1914, but it was pretty close. So this is pretty much what the layout looks like today. And people look at it and it's kind of amazing. It is a museum diorama style, but it works. Tons and tons of details. We're at installing the rivets. It's kind of an interesting observation that I make. So now all the little details like Jim talked about and all that, we're at that point. So we tried to have a very clean environment. Okay, that's one of the things Bill was after. So this is actually about 1.5 years old right now. So that's even changed since then. But you'll see, you look at some of the detailed stuff in there. It's kind of like going back, and this is a little closer view of some of the scenes. It's kind of amazing to have seen it in 2013 and seeing it the way it is now, and you kind of forget. But I wanted to show a couple modern photographs and some of the details there. This is the roundhouse. Before it was actually set in the ground. It's been set now, but so this is going back to actually December 2012. And just about, I was involved a little bit in that. I told Bill I was willing to build a model for the layout. And it was just tiny stations. So that's what I had agreed to do. And I was actually working on that model while this was going on. So they put in the bench work and they wanted it to be open. So these are engineered beams. They're like wafer board with all glued up pieces. And that allows us to have very few legs underneath, which is very helpful with handicap access and working on the layout. It's kind of interesting to see that, like the photograph on the right, how very simple that looks. And you can see now they're still working on the floor, but it's not done. They've put that underlayment. Here's again the other view of the other side. Now they've put the risers up on the top where the actual sub-road bed's going to go. but this is still a while back. So then looking at it, they decided they were going to model 1909. It's pretty significant. There was a major fire in 1909 in September. So we're modeling 2 weeks before that fire. And that whole area you're looking at actually all burnt in 1911, and then they moved everything to Dover, New Hampshire. So that's why 1909 was picked. This is a typical what those track plans look like. Those are actually, remember when the railroads all were required to do an inventory of everything? That was part of the work that was done at that time, 1914. So we've used those to develop the track plans. That one's at East Wakefield and Burleyville. This is what the track plan eventually evolved to. We have a staging area on one side, and then we have the 5 villages of Wakefield. Dave Sias and I did a lot of laying out some of the stuff. Dave was more operations oriented, and I was looking at the scenery parts of it. So we combined some things there. A few little mistakes were done, but it looks good. This is when the track was starting to be put in place. The way we did that is you can make track plans to different scales to really confirm that we had the right things. Is we actually put paper, that craft paper all over the layout, and then the turnouts and pieces of track we'll put in there to see if things made sense. You can see some of the lines that were put in there and the paper templates of that. That's the Union loop end over here. You'll notice there's not even a hole in the wall that goes into the staging area yet. There's some people working on the layout. You can see a little bit what I was talking about with the craft paper. By having that, you can not only, to me, it helps when you're planning your layout. Everyone thinks of the track and where it's going and all of that. But if you think of the scenic element at the same time, you want stuff that's going to look right when you're done. So knowing where the roads are going to go and the buildings and all of that kind of match in as well with that. And fortunately, the stuff we saw from the Boston and Maine showed the buildings as well, which was helpful to get the orientations correct. So here's a little more of the process. Now, the most important thing when you're doing this is to lay out the turnouts, where the turnouts end up going, get those in the right positions and stuff like that. So I'm going to go fairly quickly. You'll see one of the holes in the wall over there. That goes into our staging in the area near Sanbornville. I'm going to show something later on that's kind of interesting. So a lot of people were having fun with this thing, that we decided before the track went down, it was nice to paint this up road bed. And so some of the ballast doesn't show or lifts up. You've got a color underneath that is more, you're not going to see homosalt or things like that. So that's why some of it is gray, some of it is black, depending where we thought the ballast was going to go. You can see that area with the roundhouse. I showed you a picture of the roundhouse a little while ago. And it's kind of interesting. In the picture on the right, we're getting ready for one of our first open houses that we ever had. The ones that see the layout right now, you can see, I find it interesting. It looks like you look at the schedule of things. 2013 was amazingly busy. I saw a coat rack picture in there, and there were like 5 coats hanging on the rack. And there were people working on wiring as well as the track at the same time. So 2013, 2014, a lot of work got done. As it's progressed, I've noticed that it seems like things are slowing down, but I think it's because we're getting into the details and the rivets, where you can put down a lot of track and things in a fair hurry. Bill was meticulous on making sure the track and thing was done correctly. The right kind of solder, the right kind of flux, things aligned and all of that. Because otherwise, if you don't get your track right, you're going to struggle forever. And it did good with this because the track, today we automate it and the track runs well. There's a couple little minor things, but they're minor. This is what the electrical looked like early in. Doesn't look like that too much now. There's still some semblance of it. There were a lot of early controls that we were using. And some of it, the PSXs are still there. But we've simplified that as we learned more going along the way there. So it's just a historical picture of what the control. I look at some of the wiring and some of the things, you're in a hurry for some stuff and you shortcut things, but it can always be cleaned up later. I'm doing that on my home layout as well. There's a couple of people. Dave Sias is often underneath the layout here. I can recognize in the corner. Dave was instrumental in getting the stuff wired in that corner. And then Tony is helping him when he works as a conductor right now. There's a turntable and get some idea what the wiring looks like underneath with the feeders and all that. So Bill in 2013 worked 3, 4, 5 days a week there. So we'd come back on the next Wednesday and there was a lot of progress that had been made. Here's where the fascia is starting to come in place. It's just taped and primed. We tried to get as much scenery so that people would have an idea what scenery will eventually look like. That's why there's a bump here and a little bit of spots. And whatever we had to show people, we'd put there. Trees or placards or whatever. And you can see there's the visitors on one of our first open houses that we had. I found this was interesting. This lady was extremely helpful to us. She's passed away now. She wrote the book that we've used as a reference, Elizabeth Banks McCurry. And I found it was interesting. One of her dedication quotes is Ralph Waldo Hansen, who was a town clerk for the town of Wakefield for 47 years. He wrote, "How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been?" I thought that was an interesting little comment for what we were doing here. She visited the layout in 2013 and she looked at the little model and she looked at the little figures. And I had never seen that station, only through photos. So I made a model and she looked at that, she looked at me, she looked at the figures, and she says, "You people are bringing history back to life." It was like an ideal comment she made at 92 years old, that to have said that. So that stuck in my mind. So you can see some of the scenery. I'll go a little quicker on some of this because it's more historical. You can see how that we're kind of cutting away. I thought this was pretty funny. The guys that work there, we try to have fun. I found this yesterday. I'm looking at this little thing over here, and Ken White we had put these extruded foam, and with scraps we glued in there. He made little animals in there. There's a little pig, and he put eyes on them and everything. So that's inside the layout. It's covered by plaster now, so it doesn't matter. You can see where it's starting to be covered up and things like that. So December 1st of 2013, we had a real open house. We had singers. This is Neil Falby. You guys remember Neil? He came with singing. We had Santa Claus and a ton of visitors. But we didn't have a lot of layout, but people were fascinated, even what was there. So you can see that was what it pretty much looked like during that open house. It's only a little segment. It's kind of fooling when you take pictures, but this is some of the crew that was involved originally, not everyone, but involved in 2014. There was around 14 people involved at that time.
So who is everybody?
Who are all the people? Who are all the people? This is me. This is Rich Parsley and Clickety Clack, Bill, Tony, Ken White, and Joe Santoro. Here's the building, the roundhouse today, the turntable, and some of the buildings that have been added. What it looks like today. So it's kind of interesting. When you look at it today, it's kind of hard to imagine what went in behind it. So I'm going to take you through fairly quick what, when you see the finished product and how it ended up starting. You see where the turntable was, it was all handmade. I turned that on a lathe at home, cut that in and put a diamond mechanism on the bottom. Talking about your bridge. This is a brass fabrication for that bridge. And you have to be absolutely flat. And your center post has got to be 90 degrees and all of that, or it won't work. So it's hard to even see that stuff today because it's all been painted over and things like that. We were lining up the track work. So you want to make sure your track lines up with a laser going around on the turntable. So this is an interesting little story because I showed you that picture. Day after a hurricane, I had a visitor. A man came in, had a whole bunch of people with him. Turns out he had 3 generations with him. Never realized that he was related to James Tucker, this man right here. And that was his grandmother, Mary Brackett, who worked in the restaurant in the Sanbornville station. Do you remember the lady saying we brought history back to life? He wanted to show his kids what the railroad things were like, what his grandfather and his great-grandfather worked at. Well, we went beyond that. That was his great-grandfather's office. And I actually had him right on the bottom of it, you know, the years he worked. He worked for the B&M for 55 years. His grandfather worked for 60 years, from the mid-1800s until like 1925. So when we have a locomotive that his grandfather ran on the layout, it was just like, you know, started realizing this is probably why we spend all the time and we do what we do. This is a picture of his grandfather again. And that's a picture of what the real building looked like. This is a coal shed that Bill Gaver built. And in front of here, we got some help over here. Dave Emery built some of these box cars along the way. So we get help that comes from different directions. This is a Pioneer building, one of the smaller buildings that are there. A lot of scenery over here. Burleyville is most recognizable for a lot of people. There's waterways, the photo backdrop, and all that. But this is how it started. This is like just marks on a hardboard and the masonite. I mean the mason homosote. You can see the waterways being put in. Building that Bill made and some of the waters there. People are always fascinated with the Envirotex. You can see how that's shaped together, but it's kind of interesting as well to see. Okay, how many did I put in there? Okay, here's the photo backdrop. There's the sections that are painted, but most of it is photos that are actually real photographs of the area. That's the beginnings of working through the scenery, because now you don't see any of that. It's all like finished. Weaving the cardboard strips. Having fun. Trying to keep things clean.
Plastering in the back, but you've got finished scenery in front of it?
Yeah, because we had to put a little bit of it. We had to put a little bit of it for the visitors, you know, to try to go through progress. So.
Dyed your hair back then.
I dyed my hair? No, I might have been bleached by the sun a little bit. It was only 10 years ago now. We age quick once you reach the 60. So here's the cardboard matrix. I'll go quick over here with just the gauze and the rocks coloring, and then there's ground material, some of the buildings. Then we had help. This was donated to us, and here's a couple of people. That's George Allen. We lost him last year as well. They're hacking through the model that was donated to us to make it water powered. And then we've got it installed in the layout. So that's still 2014. You think about it, we had only started about a year and a half before that. So you get pretty good progress. Grade crossings, this is kind of the details that start taking some time, but it makes the layout look really well. You know, you got to go in and put in those individual boards and bevel them and things like that. This is where you're going to go visit if you come today. Main Street, Bridge Street, and Chapel Street. Made some grade crossing signs that match 1909. I think this is where it looks really accurate, but it takes time to do that kind of stuff. You know, you can see it installed. The building that Bill Gaver made, the East Wakefield. This one, Dave Sias made this model, the freight house. In late 2017, 2018, Jay Elan started working with us. He loves making big buildings. That's what, the bigger the building, the more fun he has with it. So here he is working, and he had made the Union Hotel, and he's working on the, we call it the Flatiron House, used to be a post office. So that's his model. He also did the Union Station, and we was a joint effort here. He made the model, I planted it and added the details. So it was, you can see the Union Hotel in the back and the trapezoidal. So he made the Sanbornville Station. And then 2018, we had a little diversion. I know it's a little beyond what we were talking about. We decided we were going to build a Lionel layout for visitors to come in. I say it's a diversion. I've learned how to fix and work on Lionel trains. I know I never owned them when I was younger, but you learn stuff. So here is the board on rollers, and that's Paul Zayak. He models a Lionel. Verdonk family had donated us a whole bunch of stuff. And this layout was supposed to be fun. You know, people can do whatever they want. And all of a sudden we had a dedication ceremony coming up. So all of a sudden we had a timeline to get it done. And we had like 6 months to build this layout. things you put yourself through. And here was the ribbon cutting. That Bob Verdonk, that was his father's trains, his trains when he was younger. He winters in Florida. So this is what the layout pretty much looks like right now. And then also I got my slide one mixed up, but that's okay. This is the wiring got simplified in around 2018 as well. Chris Oliver got involved. I went to visit his house. Remember we had and he uses train controller, and he came to our layout and he said, this is a perfect example for automating this. You know, you guys have such wonderful models. You need to model the trains and automate them as well. So we started that work. So now we use train controller. This is the switchboard from the computer. The trains all run automatically. So we got 5, 6 trains that run automatically. Now the visitors are all entertained. We just monitor it on our phone. The trains run per schedule. They do all the sounds, the speed changes and everything that you'd expect on a real train, real trains that would go through. So this is what it looks like on a cell phone. Kids are fascinated with this. They look at that and they're like, I had an engineer come one day. He works in CSX and Cherry Run. I gave him this. He ran a train interfacing with train controller on his own without any really training. He dispatched his own train, told train controller where he wanted to go. He ran the train through the whole layout and brought it back and put it right back where it belonged. He looked at me and said, it runs just like the real thing. I'm like, they must have done a good job with the software to have a real engineer say that. He says, the only advantage is I don't have to wait as long. He still had to wait because he was interfacing with all the other trains. So there was a bunch of rewiring that had to happen to do this. Some of these white lines over here are to get the current detectors, those CTC coils that are in there. But we were able to use the original wiring and just interface with that and make sure the coils were there to detect where the trains are. I'm going to skip this video, okay? Some of the detailed parts, we're talking about Jordan kits. There's some of the stuff that we do. This stuff takes time when you build that. A lot of the work we do at home because you can't really go on a Wednesday morning and build a Jordan kit. Jay might be able to. Then these were brass wagons that I made because they used to haul a bunch of finished lumber in Burleyville. I thought that was important. The figures, when we first started in 2013, there really wasn't any figures. So what I did is I was using some, I think it's Hawk from 1950. So I painted one just for curiosity what it looked like in 1950. And then I modified them to make it look like 1910, you know, the bigger hat, the longer dresses and things like that. So a lot of the figures we had to modify at first. And then eventually, Andrew Stodden in England, he made HO scale turn of the century figures, the Edwardian, and we've been able to paint those and things are a lot easier. We got a lot more people now on the layout that are more accurate looking. You can see a collection of, these are some of his figures and musket miniatures, which are no longer made as well, but before they were painted. The cars, we try to get those cars as realistic as we can for the time period. Okay. Here's a couple of, you saw that earlier, a couple cars that David made 5 cars for us. He made 10 at once. Remember he presented that at one of our meetings recently. Okay, so these are the people we have working on things right now. You met everyone, Jay, Paul, Bob Verdonk, and myself again. So here's Ken giving a tour a while back. You can see how much fun it is doing the tours. You learn a lot. You know, visitors are fantastic. They really enjoy themselves. Here's a camera car going around, and people are just fascinated with the camera car going around, how realistic it looks. This is a change I've made recently. We've put in 2 monitors now with AB boxes. And what's nice with that, I got a second one I'm going to put over here, is I can now use a camera car and a stationary CCD camera in 2 places. So there's always some action going on. whoever looks at this, they can see this and see what's going on. So right now we're working on trying to get more animation for visitors. It kind of brings it in more into the museum environment, where maybe a visitor can actually push some of the buttons and get things to what they want to see and what they want to do. Paul loves working on the Lionel layout. We're working on automating that right now. We've been putting push buttons with relay cards, with timers. So a kid can go up, push a button. I don't care how many times he pushes it, it locks out the button, similar to what Dave was just talking about. It'll run for 42 seconds. The horses go around in a circle, or the oil pump runs, or things like that, and then it'll stop. Once it stops, they can push it again and restart it, the water tank and that kind of stuff. We're hoping to actually get the trains to also run for like 10 minutes, where someone could push a button and the trains will actually run. We won't have to actually be there to do that. So I ran into this recently. This is funny. I was reading an old model railroader, talking about a museum layout, especially with period. I was reading an old model railroader around 1955. And they referenced this book. They said, if you're ever modeling farms, you want to get Our Vanishing Landscape by Eric Sloan. I'm like, it's the neatest book. They got all kinds of stuff in there. But as I'm perusing through this, I found something called Gunter's Chain. I said, this is absolutely amazing, okay? Gunter's Chain. The 66-foot chain, it's 100 links. The 60-foot chain defines most of the architectural parameters that we know about. I was absolutely amazed. It's like, so you got 80 chains, goes out to 1 mile. If you take 10 square chains, that's 1 acre. A quarter of a chain is a rod. And it turns out that chain, 66 feet, is typically the right of way for roads. So they have the road in the middle, but the rock walls and the fences were 66 feet apart. The railroads use 66 feet to identify the distance in their telegraph poles. Canals had a 66-foot right-of-way for the canal. So I got curious. I did a little math and, simple math, and said 66 feet in HO. So I made a Gunter's chain right here. So here's a Gunter's chain. And what they really used this for at one time, they had things called fence watchers. They still have them in Vermont. Paul says, I knew one personally. I guess there's some regulation, you can only have so many fences. So they would actually have a 100-foot chain, and the guy would go and walk off your fence to see if you were within the parameters of the fence. So I thought it was interesting to put this chain in front of the rock wall. And what I also found interesting is when we were putting in the telegraph poles, I thought 9 inches was about the right distance. And from my fingers, like comes out to 9 inches. So when I was laying out telegraph poles, I would put one in, 9 inches, put another one. Well, 9 inches, if you did the conversion, comes out to just about 66 feet or 1 chain. So somehow you're better lucking into stuff sometimes. It's about 67 feet, but close enough. So, but you'll notice they used it for everything, city blocks, everything. So it's interesting little stuff you learn. In the same book, they show how to make gates in New England. Jim, you talked about different parts of the country had different kinds of gates. New England, they tended to reuse horseshoes. They smashed them into the wood thing here after they modified the ends, and they would slide a pole in there, okay? So that's a model of it in HO scale. The little details that you see. The brass is still showing, I have to repaint that, but that's okay. Here's a gate installed and a fence right here behind the barn. Bill Gaver made that barn. We plan on automating that so we can have a horse pulling the hay thing coming up. There's a bunch of different projects we're going into. It leads me a little bit into it. One of the things I'd like to offer to people is there's a lot of stuff we learn and we have fun with, like docents. Bill Gaver, his wife and him have got some medical issues. He's taken a leave of absence. And right now we have almost like just about 3 people, and there'll probably only be 1 like this summer. So if anyone that lives around the area, if they're interested at all in either helping us on Wednesdays, or if there's something that strikes your fancy, or, we can show you, I've got little cards on how we do the docent things to show people. A lot of times, you learn a lot from it. That's one of the examples that I gave you over here. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're ever interested. I hope you come and visit